So if everybody's ready, let's get started. So we've done this in a question format, and our first question is going to be for Dr. Pam Bruening. So Pam, your question is, what does a teacher do when those who fit in the serious interventions needed category are no longer in a small minority? What happens when this is school-wide?
Thank you, Julia. And this is a very common concern where a lot of people are saying, oh my word, how can I provide specific intervention for so many students? So I'm just going to remind us real quickly that RtI or MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, is much like a sandcastle. And we have Tier 1, which is really all students, Tier 2, which is those who need some extra support, and then Tier 3 who really need students who need even more specific support. So the situation we're talking about here is where a lot of students who may be as part of Tier 2 needing extra support actually become Tier 1. And as in a sandcastle, we want to make sure that that foundation is solid, because if it's not, what will happen is those interventions that are supposed to be more specific and more intense will actually erode. So let's talk about, well, what could we do? When the majority needs extra support in the classroom, here are some things we could do. Obviously, we're going to have to be the ones making the change. The students won't change, so we've got to decide what can we do to make sure that all students do everything every day. And so obviously, if many of the students are needy in the area of behavior, we want to incorporate teaching appropriate behaviors for all students as part of class. And that's one reason why curriculum such as LEAPS is correlated with the Common Core, so that that's an easy thing to do, because we do have speaking, listening, and writing and reading standards all together there. We want to make sure as part of that classroom we value every student, that we reward and recognize what we value, and all of those things would take place. Being consistent, making sure that we scaffold in the area of directions, routines, and instruction. The more needy a group is, the more structured and specific and routine-oriented and scaffolded probably our instruction and the way we run our classroom needs to be. That same thing happens in a school. When the majority of the school becomes more needy as a population, we need to be the ones, the educators, making the adjustments. So here's where it's very important to have a school-wide system of support with common language, which PBS is an example of positive behavior support, where we have those common school expectations and everyone's focused on those things. And that kind of drives how we do business every day. We want to think about how we can change our instructions so that, again, every student is doing everything every day. This may mean in a school-wide situation that an administrator provides some or establishes some non-negotiables for the staff, such as everyone will teach behavior at least once a week as part of an extended homeroom. That's just one example. We want to make sure that we build those positive student connections school-wide, that we work at valuing and recognizing, rewarding those things that we want to see with students as far as behavior, that we teach school-wide behavior appropriately to all students, that we align our discipline systems of support. And this is one thing that many schools forget when they're busy with the common school languages. They forget to align their discipline systems of support with that. So it's not just punitive and punishment. There are consequences, yes, but that we make sure that we have support in there as well throughout that discipline system. And then finally, again, we want to make sure we scaffold those structured routines, systems, and instructions school-wide.
Great, thank you, Pam. Our next question is for Jay. It's from St. Lucie, and what are some ways to increase student engagement?
Hello, everyone, and this is a great question. It's one that, especially as you talk about Tier 1 and the capacity of actually getting the gen ed kids involved and helping the teachers to be able to facilitate typically things that are outside their comfort zone. Well, let me just throw something out there for you to consider. You know, contrary to popular belief, most kids who actually dropped out this past year were passing their classes. And in fact, 81% of those polled who had dropped out said that they thought that graduating was essential to their success, but they did it anyway. And the most common reason given is they just flat out were not engaged in the academic process. And when we pull up a lot of our templates about re-engaging the disengaged student, you'll see things like, you know, improve teaching curricula, improve instruction, and build a school that fosters academics, etc. I would say that it's a misnomer, because it's kind of that definition of failure. If you do something and you do it over again and you keep getting the same results, that's kind of that definition of insanity. So before we go further, let me just recognize that, yes, education is imperative. Yes, reading and writing and arithmetic are vital. Yes, it would be better if students were self-motivated, and yes, it would be better if parents taught kids how to behave, and yes, it would be better if teachers only had to teach. It's just not the real world we live in. So as a teacher, as an administrator, what you begin looking at is, how do I motivate my kids to be engaged? Looking at the two different types of motivation or engagement, one being extrinsic, things that occur outside that provide a kind of a focus for the kids to look at, and then intrinsic. That intrinsic is what is learned through experience. Extrinsic is where you can really make change. And in fact, a lot of the social and emotional work done out there is born out of what used to be known as psychosocial, which are the extrinsic motivators that tend to occur that can either exacerbate a good behavior or a bad behavior. Let me give you some things to think about. We live in a postmodern society, and that means we're about 3 generations into kids that come from a knowledge-based system, not a working system. A lot of us grew up in a time where the majority of people were manual laborers, physical laborers, learned work ethic through that process. Kids today know how to access information much more readily, but working is not a big part of their growing up experience. And what that means is that it's harder for kids to engage in old-style teaching methods because that's not where they've grown up. So let me give you some things to consider about engagement. Number one, connecting with the kids. In order to foster intrinsic, and that's what you want to get to, that self-motivation, you have to create learning activities that are based on topics that are relevant to the students' lives. Lots of research out there that means you're talking current events, using current technology, connecting the lessons with your students' culture, outside interests, and social lives. They've got to have that connection occur. And then a focus on social topics, because if you think about this, when you want a student to engage in mathematics, there's no immediacy of impact. There's no gratification that occurs on that immediately. However, from a social standpoint, if kids can get in and learn social skills, there is an immediate impact that occurs. So help tie in those lessons, especially in Tier 1 when you're talking about behavioral stuff, that directly impact their life. Now then, I want to make real clear on this one, establish a sense of belonging. When kids disengage, it tends to be because they don't feel they're a part of the process. And I'm not advocating that it has to all be warm and fuzzy, but, do you like going and sitting through a droned lecture? No, and no one wants to work in an environment where it's constantly someone looking for a gotcha rather than something encouraging. Kids are the same way, and kids today see walking away as an option. And so we have to have a learning environment that really fosters their sense of belonging, helps them understand they're a part of the process, and then provides choices. And this is a huge thing for the kids today. We want social and emotional development maturity. Well, maturity is taking experiences and making good choices on a go-forward basis. That can't happen unless choices are provided. And I'm not advocating an abdication of control, but instead, opportunities for kids to make choices, whether that's, choosing a lab partner, possibly where they sit, or it could be something as complex, for example, as contract teaching. That ability to let the kids determine what the homework's going to be on a given assignment. Letting them teach a lesson every now and then. And surprisingly, when this occurs, kids tend to be harder on themselves than what the teacher was going to be, because when they're involved in that decision-making process, they're more apt to take ownership of it. And so finally along this, what I would say is that when you engage your kids, it's really about re-engaging your students. And oftentimes, if we're speaking honestly, it's about teachers re-engaging as well. You look for the immediacy of impact. And if you're teaching a lesson that does not impact your kids now, then you have to help them understand why it's important to invest in it for the future. But you also have to mix in some of those immediacy of impact lessons. And I'll tell you, social training is the greatest immediacy impactor out there. The pedagogy, is it active or is it passive? A lecture, a video, things that are passive in learning have the lowest opportunity for actual learning to occur. Active learning has a much greater chance of actually creating learning opportunities. The learning environment itself, what's stopping you and what are you doing to change it? Your priorities as far as, is the test more important than the student? If so, learning's going to be harder to come by. And then finally, are you flat out preparing your kids for life? Let me show you this. Oftentimes we talk about behaviors in the classroom, but the cause of most behaviors in school tends to occur because we have a very linear pathway of progression through our educational systems. First graders are supposed to be ready for second grade, ninth for 10th, etc. But our kids don't develop in that same linear progression. Instead, by our own learning experiences and our own learning theories, whether that's Piaget or Erickson or any of those, kids tend to develop in phases. That means you're going to have behaviors in the classroom, and it doesn't mean your kids are have a disorder or disorderly or that there's a problem. It can just flat out mean you've got a gap between expectation and actual maturity. The way we mature our kids are helping them with the experiences necessary for maturation to occur. Tier 1 provides that opportunity of teaching against the gaps that are leading to the behaviors within the classroom.
Great. Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. The next question is for Pam. It's from Rapides Parish in Louisiana. What specific strategies are going to be incorporated for inclusion students with EBD labels?
Thank you, Julia. First of all, let me just say EBD in at least the state in Florida and perhaps in Louisiana as well refers to emotional and behavioral disorder. In other states, I know they call it something slightly different, but the idea is the same. So we're asking, what can we do for inclusion when students with EBD label are in those classes? Well, I would bring this to you first. What do students with an EBD label actually need? Well, they need structured routines. We know they need frequent feedback for whatever they're doing constantly, like every 5 minutes probably. They need practice working well with others. They need very short lessons of 15 minutes or less. Their attention span's much less. They need the opportunity to move and interact with content. They need a safe place to try new things. That's part of that emotional part, and the opportunity to make mistakes and be okay with that. They need repetition and practice, and they need social skills instruction. Much of these things, if you think about it, are just good teaching for all students. So I would propose to you, can we use what students with EBD labels need in general to teach all students? So let's think about these questions. Are these things good for all students? And if we think down through that list we just saw, yes, I would say probably most of them are, especially if we want to keep their attention. Why not implement them as part of Tier 1 instruction for all students? Is this a poor way to teach? I don't think so. Can I meet the needs of all my students in some of these ways? I would submit that you probably can. Can I structure to help me differentiate instruction? Absolutely. And so when EBD students with EBD labels need that specific structure, most other students do. Plus, that structure that you incorporate in your classroom will help you to differentiate instruction a lot more easily. The structure, if the structure is already in place. And will this help me to collect formative assessment data? Absolutely. Again, you'll have those short chunks of things. When you're busy providing feedback, a lot of that can be used as formative assessment data. That's actually kind of what that is. Moving on, many people ask, well, what about the IEP? We know that there are certain things we need to follow. That's the individual educational plan. Absolutely. But I have found that one effective way to do this, especially in inclusion, is to put those general structures in place for all students. So for example, if we know we have many students in there who would respond better to very short lessons, to some small group work, to some choices, as Jay was just talking about there, some of those motivational pieces, maybe to behavioral lessons. If we know that many of the students in the classroom already need that, let's go ahead and build that right into our general structure for our class time, and then use the specific structures for those individuals, and we can just slide those right in there as needed. So sometimes it's really easier to look at the IEPs first, take a look and see, well, all of the students that are in here, what are some of those components you need? Jot those down and figure out, well, how many need this and how many need that. And like I said, behavioral lessons won't hurt anyone if you did it as a whole group. Or if you really want to focus on those specific groups or give them more, you can already organize your class time so that there is small group time going on, and that can take place during that time. We want to follow the IEP and collect data on those necessary items to address the progress with those IEP goals. But at the same time, we may have to realize how we can arrange ourselves differently, how we can structure our teaching time differently, and maybe how we can provide that actual instruction differently in order to meet the needs of those students with EBD in addition to all students, and make it an atmosphere in which we would enjoy as well.
Great. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. Question number 4 is going to be for Jay. It's from Miami, Florida. How can LEAPs be used most effectively at the Tier 1 level? Do you recommend using the LEAPs in a group of more than a classroom?
That's a great question. And if you think about Tier 1, and let's talk very specifically about the options that you have. There are 2 ways you can do Tier 1. One is responsive and one is directive. Responsive means we're going to wait till something bad happens and then teach against it. So we're going to have a fight occur, or we're going to have kids get caught cheating on a test, and now we're going to go in and teach against it. The problem is when you wait, that means something bad's already occurred. It's already affected and impacted the classroom. You're much better off to have a directive approach for Tier 1. And that means either class-wide at least, hopefully it's at least building-wide if not district-wide, you're going to have a focus for a given month. Let's say it's bullying this month, or respect, or citizenship, whatever that may be. Have everyone focused on a specific area, and this creates that common vernacular that's necessary for the PBS framework, also for RtI and MTSS, to have a common vernacular and focus. Now, once you have that common theme, you have to realize that even if you have 2 6th grade classes next door to each other, they're going to have different needs because they have different kids in there. So take the educators, the teachers, get their input as to what needs to be taught to their class. This does 2 things. One is it individualizes it for the class. More importantly, it provides an ownership chain back to the teacher. If the teacher has input, they're more apt to buy into the process itself. And then once a teacher is given input as to the needs of their class, then you've got to give the teacher the resources to actually do it. Resource fulfillment is key here. If you don't have the lesson plans to give to the teachers, then all you're doing is recognizing a problem. And then on the resource, it needs to be need-centered and common sense oriented. Well, let me show you how that works within LEAPs. If you come over to your LEAPs license, and most people are on here are LEAPs folks, and you go under the curriculum tab, and under the curriculum tab here, you choose Browse Curriculum, and you come to Classroom Challenges. What you'll see is here are the areas you can choose. And once again, you'll see things like respect or bullying or self-control. Even for our little guys down here, bullying, respect, decisions, communication. Well, you go in and you answer questions. And then you choose an area, answer the questions. The questions are just simple behavioral observations. What are you seeing happening in your classroom? This is that individualization as well as ownership we talked about. We've chosen an area, and maybe everyone in the building, everyone at school is working on respect this month, but respect means different things to different classes. This is not a student-by-student assessment, and that's why this will work whether it's a classroom or even a group larger than a classroom. For example, an after-school program. What you do is you say, what's happening within my group? What am I seeing? Answer those simple questions, and what LEAPs will do for you is it will take now and say, here are your primary lessons, and you'll see there's the ones that are high need are in gold, those that are a mid-level need are in purple, and so now rather than choosing from 250 lesson plans, here are the 5 or 6 most relevant for you. So that takes us, we now have a directive approach, we're focusing on respect. We need to create ownership and individualization, so we ask the teachers to answer some questions. Now we've got to fulfill it from resource standpoint, and that means for the little guys we have lesson plans that are centered on that K through 2 learning mode, which is an intuitive phase. Those intuitive learners that are just now being introduced to the social and emotional process. For our LMI kids, or those kids who are not yet socially independent, but have moved beyond the intuitive phase. They're in that concrete phase of beginning to understand multitasking and problem solving. But due to their age or functioning level, they're not socially independent. Lesson plans for these kids. And then for the kids who are actually in the formal operations phase, typically middle and high school kids who are socially independent, that means that they're now ready for actual problem solving, and the lessons are practical and in vivo. So you don't have to choose, from just guessing at what's needed. Listen to the teachers. From the teacher's standpoint, be directive. Show them, we're going to work on, bullying this month, but class to class, let them individualize it, and then give them the resources to actually go in and do it. And then as you do this, you can actually track what's been taught, what the next recommendation is, and that lets you complete the necessary regulatory components of Tier 1. You've taught based on a preventative need. You have recommendations based upon the input of the teacher. You've individualized it for the classroom. You fulfilled it with resources. Now we're just keeping track of what's been taught, and that lets you complete Tier 1.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. So that is our presentation for you today. We appreciate you coming. I want to remind you, if you missed part of it and came late, you're welcome to come join us again this afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. Please feel free to do that. You can register on the main website. What I'd like to do now is, again, say thank you for taking your time. If you have any other questions, please feel free to send them to us via email. And what I'd like to see is if Pam and Jay have any final comments. We've got their contact information up, but let me give them a few minutes to give final comments.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and once again, you can go to goleaps.com. There are lesson plans available to you, as well as all sorts of training opportunities centered around Tier 1, 2, and 3. And we'll also provide, if you'd like, individual webinars showing you LEAPS and all that good stuff. So thanks for coming. Thanks for participating. Hope everyone has a great day. Pam?
Yes, thank you for coming, everybody. And I just want to tell you, too, if you want to learn more about what Progressive Bridges can do for you in your school or your district, we provide consultation and professional development for teachers and administrators. Just go ahead and drop me an email, or you can go to my website to find out more information. Also, like us on Facebook, where we have teacher tools and tips posted daily. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Pam?
No, just thank you very much for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and again, thank you for attending. If you'd like to come back and visit the second webinar this afternoon, please do so, and watch on our website, www.goleaps.com, for the additional webinars that will be coming in the next series. Again, thank you very much.